My hands still feel the grit of sanded wood, the sting of varnish that never washes off. 6 years ago, I poured my life into a place I thought was my sanctuary. But last month, my family tore it from me, handed it to someone else like I was a ghost in my own story. I'm John, and this is how I lost the home I built and fought to claw it back. 6 years ago, I was 28, scraping by as a freelance graphic designer in a small coastal town. My life was late nights, instant noodles, and a fire in my gut to prove I was more than my parents' afterthought. They, Morin and Harold, owned a rundown cottage on the edge of town, inherited from my great-aunt. It was a mess. Rotting deck, cracked windows, a roof that leaked like it was crying. They didn't gift it to me, no. They offered a deal. Rent it for half the going rate. It's practically yours. John, my mom said, her voice sharp, like she was bartering at a flea market. I took it. The cottage was a 5-minute walk from the ocean. The salt air burned my lungs and the waves drowned out the world. It wasn't just a place, it was a promise, so I got to work. I ripped out warped floorboards, knuckles bloody from splintered wood. I painted the walls a soft driftwood gray, then a warm cedar. I replaced the rusted sink, the creaky porch railing, and the ancient heater that groaned like a dying beast. Every gig I took, every late invoice, every spare cent went into that cottage. It was mine, not on paper, but in every nail I hammered. Every night I scrubbed salt stains off the windows, dreaming of the day I could finally call it home. My parents would visit, pacing the porch like landlords. You're turning this place around. John, my dad would say, his tone heavy with something I mistook for approval. My mom would nod, eyeing the new ceiling fan, the custom bookshelves I'd built by hand. This will be worth a fortune someday, she said. I thought they meant for me. I have an older sister, Nora, 32, their pride and joy. Growing up, Nora got the violin lessons. I got her old sketch pads. She got a car for graduation. I got a handshake. When she wanted grad school, they paid. When I needed a computer for work, they suggested a payment plan. I didn't hate Nora. She was just living her life. But my parents? They carved a chasm between us, favoring her at every turn. 2 years ago, they came to me with a crisis. John, we're in deep, my dad said, avoiding my eyes. We took a $40,000 loan against, and that's where everything started to unravel. 2 years ago, the world I'd built around that cottage started to crack. John, we're in deep, my dad said, avoiding my eyes. He shuffled papers across the kitchen table like they were dangerous weapons. We took a $40,000 loan against the cottage. I froze. Every knot I'd sanded, every nail I'd hammered, every night I'd stayed up with the smell of varnish clinging to my hair. It all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. What? I asked, my voice trembling. We didn't have a choice, my mom said, her lips pressed tight. The repairs on the main house, the medical bills. We thought it was temporary, like they could just take the future I was building and call it a short-term problem. Remember pacing the worn floorboards, the same ones I'd replaced twice? My mind raced. I'd scraped together everything to make the cottage livable. It wasn't just property, it was my life's work. And now my parents had gambled it away without asking me, treating it like it wasn't real. Like I wasn't real. I wanted to scream. I wanted to argue. But I had no legal claim. The cottage was still technically theirs. My name wasn't on any paperwork. Meanwhile, Nora, my older sister, she seemed oblivious to it all. When I confronted her, she shrugged. It's not my problem, John. Her voice was casual, like the cottage wasn't built with my blood and sweat, like the years I poured into it didn't exist. I was angry, heartbroken, and more than anything, I felt invisible. I spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling I had painted a soft cedar color, thinking about all the times my parents had given her what I had to fight for. Every privilege, every opportunity, and now the cottage. I started documenting everything. Every repair I made, every expense I'd paid. Photographs of the walls, the floors, the custom shelves I'd carved. I needed proof that I had invested my life into that place, even if the law didn't recognize it. At the same time, my parents' behavior shifted. They'd visit less, call more, offering vague apologies and platitudes. We didn't know what else to do, my dad would say. It'll work out in the end. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to hope. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were already envisioning handing the cottage over to Nora. The tension grew. Every family dinner was a minefield. My parents would ask about my work as if it were a hobby, while showering Nora with praise for her career and lifestyle and the cottage. It hung over every conversation like a storm cloud. Then came the day I saw it coming. My dad mentioned casually over tea that Nora was thinking about moving in soon. My stomach dropped. Every fiber of effort, every sleepless night, every drop of sweat. They were planning to hand it to her. I clenched my fists, feeling years of frustration boil inside me. And in that moment, a determination I didn't know I had began to form. If they wanted to take what I built, I wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. I started researching my options, legal loopholes, evidence of investment, anything that could give me a claim. But I also knew that this wouldn't just be about paperwork. It would be about proving that the cottage wasn't just a building. It was my life's work every night. I'd walk along the edge of the property, feeling the ocean breeze on my face, listening to the waves crash against the rocks, and thinking, I'm not giving this up. Not without a fight. And that's when I realized the battle for the cottage would test everything. My relationship with my family, my patience, my very sense of self. They thought they could erase me from this story. They had no idea I was already planning my comeback. Before I continue, tell, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. It was a gray, windy morning when I finally saw it coming. The moment I had feared for years. I got a call from my mom. Her voice was too bright, too casual. John, come over. We need to talk about the cottage. My chest tightened. Something in her tone told me this wasn't about repairs, or advice, or a casual family chat. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, faces stiff, papers spread out before them. And John, my dad began, clearing his throat. We've made a decision. I knew before he spoke what it would be. We're giving the cottage to Nora. Time seemed to stop. My hands, which had built every floorboard, every shelf, every corner of that place, went numb. My vision blurred. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I felt like a ghost in my own story, watching them hand over the world I'd created to someone else. It's for the best, my mom said gently, as if trying to soften the blow. She's moving back into town and, well, you've done so much already. So all those years, the nights covered in sawdust, the endless scraping, painting, fixing, and perfecting were meaningless. A gift for my sister, not for me. I left before I said something I'd regret. I needed air. I needed the ocean. I needed the cottage. Even if I couldn't touch it anymore, walking along the shore, every wave seemed to mock me. Every salty gust reminded me of what I had lost. My hands itched to work, to fix, to create. But the creation that had been mine was no longer mine at all. Started thinking about what they didn't realize. They thought they could erase all those years of sweat and love. They thought I would just accept it, but I had proof. Pictures, receipts, notes, every improvement documented, every repair recorded. The cottage wasn't just an address. It was a testament to my effort, my skill, my life. And I realized that day, if I wanted it back, I couldn't rely on hope or my parents' conscience. I had to fight. I contacted a lawyer, quietly at first, testing the waters. I learned about legal options, investment claims, improvements made on property without reimbursement. Every detail mattered. Every nail I'd hammered might become evidence, but it wasn't just legal. It was personal. It was about reclaiming respect, reclaiming my place in a family that had consistently undervalued me. Nora had no idea of the storm she was walking into. She thought she was moving into a gift. She didn't know it was my battle, and I wasn't going to lose. That night, I sat in my empty apartment, staring at the photos of the cottage, the warm cedar walls, the custom bookshelves, the tiny kitchen I'd gutted and rebuilt with my own hands, and I made a promise to myself. This cottage, every inch of it, was coming back to me, no matter what it took. After the initial shock wore off, I realized something important. Crying and pacing wouldn't get me the cottage back. Action would. I spent the next few weeks gathering every scrap of evidence I had, photos of before and after, receipts for every repair, invoices for materials, notes about the hours I'd spent sanding, painting, and installing. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a record of my life poured into that house, every day. I called my lawyer, learning what I could and couldn't do. Every conversation left me more determined. This wasn't just about property. It was about respect. It was about proving that the work I'd done mattered, that I mattered. I also started talking to neighbors and friends who had seen the transformation firsthand. They remembered the nights I was there, hammering away under the glow of a single light bulb. Some even took photos for me. My story was no longer just mine, it was corroborated. But the hardest part was facing my family. At dinner one night, I watched my parents praise Nora for her career achievements, casually mentioning the cottage again. My fingers tightened around my fork. I kept my voice calm, but every word was measured. I've documented every repair and improvement, I said slowly. This wasn't just a cottage. It was my investment in every sense. I want what I've built back. My dad froze. My mom blinked rapidly, avoiding my eyes. Nora looked uncomfortable, like she hadn't expected me to fight. It's just a house. John, my mom said finally, you're overreacting. It's not just a house, I shot back. It's 6 years of my life. I poured everything into it. You handed it to her like I didn't exist. The silence that followed was heavy. I knew they felt the weight of my words, but I also knew they weren't going to give in easily. Legal letters were sent. Meetings scheduled. The back and forth was grueling, emotionally exhausting. My parents tried to argue that improvements weren't enough to claim ownership, that the cottage had always been theirs. But every photo, every receipt, every testimony from neighbors chipped away at their defenses. Meanwhile, I continued working on the cottage, even though technically it wasn't mine anymore. Every visit was strategic, taking notes, documenting further changes, preserving proof of my efforts. I refused to let my labor be erased, and then, the most frustrating part, Nora. She tried to placate me, saying things like, I didn't ask for this. John, you should be happy for me, I wanted to scream. This wasn't about happiness. This was about fairness, about justice, about reclaiming what was taken from me. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting with my lawyer, I walked along the porch I had built from scratch. The wind whipped through my hair, the ocean roaring below. I clenched my fists and made a vow I would get this cottage back, not just to reclaim the building, but to reclaim my voice, my effort, my worth, no matter how long it took. The weeks stretched into months. Every legal letter I sent felt like throwing a pebble into an ocean, but slowly ripples began to form. Learned quickly that my parents weren't going to make it easy. Morin would reply with vague statements, avoiding responsibility. Harold would brush off meetings, muttering about family, decisions and priorities. They treated the cottage like a chess piece, and me like a pawn. But I wasn't a pawn. I spent hours at the cottage, documenting everything, every repair I had done years ago, every small improvement I had made. I even recorded the neighbors' statements, their astonishment at what I'd accomplished. Every word, every photo. Every memory became ammunition. And then came the breakthrough, a clause buried in the property papers, one that gave any party who had improved the property significantly the right to claim compensation. Suddenly, the fight wasn't just about pleading or begging. There was leverage. There was power. I presented it to my parents calmly. This isn't personal, I said. It's legal. I've invested 6 years into that cottage. That work has value, and I intend to claim it. They didn't like hearing it. The smug superiority in their eyes flickered just for a moment. Nora, too, looked uneasy. She hadn't expected me to fight this hard, to know my rights, to challenge them with proof. I spent the next few weeks negotiating, but I refused to compromise. Every day I reminded myself why this mattered. Not just the cottage, but the principle that hard work cannot be ignored or stolen. There were moments of doubt. Nights I lay awake thinking, is this worth all the stress? Will they ever respect me? But I'd glance at the photographs of the cottage, the shelves I'd built, the walls I'd painted, and the answer was always clear. I couldn't let 6 years of my life be dismissed, and then came the final confrontation. It was a stormy evening when I walked into the living room of my parents' house. The rain tapped on the windows, the same way it had when I first started the cottage renovation. My parents and Nora were seated, tense. I've given it a lot of thought, I said firmly. And I'm not leaving this room without the recognition that what I built is mine. That the effort, the time, the money, it all counts. And legally it does too. Morin opened her mouth, then closed it. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Nora looked down at her hands. You're serious, she said, softly, deadly serious. I replied. The hours that followed were exhausting. Arguments, counter-arguments, threats of legal action. But every time they tried to dismiss me, I brought the evidence. Every receipt, every photo, every neighbor's statement was another brick in my fortress. The end of the night, they finally relented. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Would get the cottage back, but it wasn't just about winning. It was about showing them that I had a voice, that my work and effort mattered, and that no one, no matter their favoritism or power, could erase me. As I walked out of their house that night, drenched from the rain, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. The cottage was coming back to me. Every splintered board, every painted wall, every painstaking detail was about to belong where it always should have, under my care. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of justice. Not revenge, not anger, but vindication. And I knew that the next chapter of this story, my reclamation of the cottage, was about to begin. The weeks following our confrontation were tense, almost unbearable. Every call, every message from my parents felt like a test of patience and my resolve. They tried to stonewall me, claiming family decisions and misunderstandings, but I refused to back down. I spent countless hours at the cottage, not just documenting, but preparing. Each shelf, each wall, each floorboard I had painstakingly built became a symbol of my determination. I walked through every room as if marking it with invisible signatures, reminders to myself that this was my life's work. My lawyer and I devised a plan. Step by step, we would show that the improvements I had made increased the cottage's value far beyond what my parents had invested. Witnesses were lined up, neighbors who had seen my daily toil, friends who had helped on weekends, even delivery people who remembered the hours I spent carrying materials up the crooked steps. But it wasn't easy. My parents doubled down. They claimed that the cottage was always theirs, that Nora had plans for it that had nothing to do with me. They tried to minimize the significance of my labor, dismissing it as minor repairs. Nora, for her part, tried to act innocent, as if the cottage had simply fallen into her lap. But there were cracks in her facade, hesitation, guilt, subtle recognition that what I had built mattered far more than she realized. Every interaction became a battlefield. Calls in the middle of the night, messages with passive-aggressive undertones, meetings where my parents tried to charm or guilt-trip me. But each time, I remained firm, calm, calculated. I started keeping a diary of every encounter, every conversation, every small victory. It wasn't just about legality. It was about history, proof, memory. I was reclaiming not just the cottage, but the narrative of my life. There were moments of doubt. Times when I'd stand on the porch of the cottage, the wind whipping against me, waves crashing in the distance, and think, is it worth it? Will they ever see reason? And then I'd remember the first day I ripped out those warped floorboards, the nights I stayed up varnishing the walls, the months I spent scraping paint and fixing rusted pipes. Every drop of sweat was a stake in this fight, and giving up was never an option. The legal strategy began to work. Letters from my lawyer highlighted the value of my contributions. Each reply from my parents was more defensive, more strained. Slowly, the advantage shifted, and then the breakthrough came. A mediator brought in to help settle the dispute, recognized the sheer amount of work I had invested. The evidence was irrefutable. The photos, the receipts, the testimonies. They painted a picture of a man who had poured 6 years of his life into a home, only to have it taken from him. At that moment, I realized the fight wasn't just legal, it was personal. It was about reclaiming respect, acknowledgement, and the life I had built for myself. I looked at Nora, sitting silently across the table, and said, I'm not trying to take more than what's mine. I just want recognition for what I've done. This cottage, it belongs where it's always belonged, with me. Her eyes softened, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of understanding. She realized that this wasn't a battle of greed, it was a battle for justice. As the mediator nodded in agreement with my claims, I felt a surge of relief and determination. I was closer than ever to reclaiming the home that had been my sanctuary, my project, my pride, but the battle was not yet over. My parents still had pride, stubbornness, and disbelief stacked against me. The final confrontation, I knew, would test everything, my patience, my resolve, and my courage. Yet, standing there, with the scent of salt air drifting through the open windows of the cottage, I knew one thing for certain. I was not going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. The day finally came. I arrived at the cottage early in the morning. The sun glinted off the ocean waves, and the salt breeze carried a sense of renewal. Everything I had worked for, fought for, and defended was about to be recognized. My parents were there, stiff and uncomfortable. Nora was too, sitting quietly, hands clasped in her lap. The mediator had already gone through the documents, reviewed my evidence, and laid out the facts. "This is overwhelming," my mom muttered, glancing at the photos of the renovations I'd done. "Overwhelming?" I asked, voice steady. "Try 6 years of my life, poured into every corner of this house, only to have it taken from me. You've erased me for the last time," the mediator nodded at me. "Based on the documentation and testimony, it is clear that John's contributions are substantial. He has legal and moral claim to the cottage." I felt a rush of vindication. Every sleepless night, every call ignored, every insult minimized, it all led to this moment. Nora finally spoke. "John, I didn't realize. I thought it was given to me." "I know," I said, my voice softening. "But it wasn't. This was mine all along. And now it's coming back to me. Not to punish anyone, but because it belongs to the person who built it." My parents were silent. Harold's jaw was tight. Morin's eyes avoided mine. I could see the shame creeping in, their realization that favoritism and neglect had consequences. The mediator handed me the official paperwork. My name was on the cottage. The house I had dreamed of, built from scratch and fought for legally and emotionally, was finally mine. Tears welled in my eyes. I stepped onto the porch, ran my hand along the railing I had carved, breathed in the cedar walls I had painted, and felt an overwhelming sense of triumph. It wasn't just about the cottage. It was about proving that my work, my life, and my effort mattered. That no one, not even family, could erase the value of dedication and perseverance. Nora stood beside me. "I get it now, John, you earned this." And in that moment, I realized something else. Reclaiming the cottage was only part of the victory. I had reclaimed myself, my parents' favoritism, their neglect, and their attempt to erase me no longer had power over me. The ocean waves roared below, the sun glinted off the windows, and for the first time in years, the cottage felt alive because I was home. I smiled, knowing the battle was over, and my sanctuary was finally fully mine.